Hello, this is Tommy Franks. Welcome to the 4-Star Leadership Podcast, product of the General Tommy Franks Leadership Institute and Museum. We're here to get a view into the lives of the legacy makers, the movers and the shakers of today. Offer insights from the full spectrum of the leadership community. We'll talk to former 4-star students and explore their leadership development path. We'll work to find out what they are about today and learn from the opportunities they've made for themselves in this world. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this podcast. Remember, leaders are not born, they're developed.
Hello, and welcome to episode 34 of the Core Principles of Leadership with General Tommy Franks podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jill Green, and today I'm honored to be able to speak with the president of Folds of Honor Foundation, retired Colonel Nick Nichols. Colonel Nichols is a decorated Air Force F-16 pilot with 7 combat tours serving in both Afghanistan and Iraq. He also had the privilege of serving as group commander, leading nearly 500 airmen, and was responsible for nearly $1 billion in military assets. Nick inherited the drive to be a fighter pilot from his father, a Vietnam veteran who flew F-4s, F-100s, and F-16s. His father was tragically killed when he was just 15 years old. After serving in the Air Force for over 30 years, he climbed out of the cockpit and 2 days later began a new chapter in his life serving with the Folds of Honor Foundation, which provides educational scholarships to spouses and children of our servicemen and women and first responders who were either injured or killed in the line of duty. Today, as president of Folds of Honor, Colonel Nichols serves the Folds of Honor scholarship recipients with unwavering passion. Since 2007, Folds of Honor has awarded over 51,000 scholarships. In addition to serving our country in his current position with the Folds of Honor Foundation, Colonel Nichols is an accomplished public speaker, obsessive hunter, new rancher, and husband to his wife, Carrie, and dad to their children, Hannah, Garrett, and Riley. Before we get started in our program, we'll have a quick word from one of our major sponsors, REI Oklahoma. REI Oklahoma is proud to be part of the General Tommy Franks Leadership Institute and Museum in the production and distribution of these podcasts designed to inspire leaders and difference makers. At REI Oklahoma, we have been working with small business leaders, entrepreneurs, and people who are driven to succeed for years. Highly motivated people working to own their own businesses, live in their own homes, and make the world a better place since its beginning. REI Oklahoma has continued to identify hurdles and deliver holistic solutions to create job growth and help neighborhoods thrive in both rural and urban communities. REI Oklahoma looks forward to visiting with you about helping your business and community grow. Visiting reiok.org or call 1-800-658-2823 to start the conversation.
The LaBarge family is a fourth-generation Oklahoma family. That may not sound like a long time, but our grandfathers were born here, within the Comanche Nation, before the land grants. We are the proudest sponsor of the Tommy Franks 4-Star Leadership Podcast. We hope listeners will heed the words of these distinguished men and women who have served our country at the highest levels and across all walks of life.
So we're joined today by retired Colonel Nick Nichols. He's a decorated F-16 pilot who served in the Air Force for over 30 years. And currently, he is the president of Folds of Honor. It's a nonprofit that funds scholarships for spouses and children of servicemen and women and first responders who were either killed or wounded in the line of duty. So it is a pleasure to have you with us today, Colonel Nichols.
Oh, thank you so much, Jill. It's an honor to be here.
So I know a little bit about Folds of Honor. Both of my children have received scholarships from Folds of Honor, so it actually holds a very dear place in my heart. And we are eternally grateful for the compassion that Folds of Honor has and the ability to help us with funding their education so that they can go on and be productive citizens of this world. So before we get started on Folds of Honor, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, you bet. So you kind of mentioned a little bit in the bio there. So, my background grew up as a military brat. So my father was a fighter pilot, and I ended up kind of following in his shoes and joined the Air Force. And like you talked about, spent 30 years doing that. Privileged enough to be an F-16 pilot, which was amazing, and got to hold some really cool leadership positions. More importantly, along the way, I've got my wife Carrie of now 35 years, which is awesome, and three awesome grown kids who are all college graduates. My youngest was also a Folds of Honor scholarship recipient, and she is now graduated and teaching school. And I've been with the Folds of Honor for about 5 years now. In fact, actually, today is my 5th year anniversary at the Folds. I've been in this position as president for about 7 months now, and it's been, super fun and exciting. Very excited about the direction the organization is going, and that is, my basic background and stuff. And I'm sure we'll get to a few more things.
So, and you said that your dad was a pilot, so I can imagine that that's kind of where your love of flight comes from. So, when you were younger, and you're seeing leaders, in and out of your lives, what did a leader look like to you?
No, that's a great question. So younger, obviously, when you're younger, I think most kids look towards their parents. I was very fortunate to have, two awesome parents, and both my mom and my dad. And of course, as a son, you kind of typically look towards your father. So, and what I saw in my dad, you don't think about it at the time as, quote, leadership and stuff. You can kind of look back in the rearview mirror now and see that. And, the leadership that I saw in him was being present, right? He was a fighter pilot, busy guy, all those things, but always made time. He was coaching, my football team, coaching baseball, doing that type of stuff, just involved in being there. I unfortunately lost my dad when I was 15 years old, but had him long enough for that to certainly imprint upon me and to see his really what is servant leadership, right? And that's kind of the core of any really good leader, because if serving is below you, then leadership is definitely beyond you, right? And I saw in my dad that servant's heart. A few times got to see him speak publicly, and he was a very good public speaker. And I think that's obviously something else that a leader needs to possess. But seeing that servant leader, seeing how he was with me, my brother, my sister, my mom, and that type of stuff, which is, really, kind of in the household, for a mom and a dad, that is the formative years of creating what a leader should look like for your children. And so he definitely was not only my hero, but the leader that I looked up to.
And that is a lot of people, our first leaders that we see are our parents. So, when you join the military, my husband was in, and we saw all kinds of leaders when we were throughout his military career, and some were a lot better than others. In the military, what did a successful leader look like to you?
That's a good question. Yeah. So um, I think a lot of people look towards the military as sort of and rightfully so, because I mean, obviously, several great leaders have come out of the military. General Franks obviously being one of those, and it it's a weird dynamic because leadership in the military is not like leadership in the civilian world, right? Especially a commander in the military has a unique authority that does not exist in, a purely civilian department at a, law firm or, financial firm or something like that. So what a good leader always looked like to me, and there's some of the ones that I can go back to. I can remember like my first flight commander when I was a very young fighter pilot in Misawa Air Base, Japan. And I can remember I was I wasn't really in trouble so much, but I was definitely being counseled and mentored. Because as a young fighter pilot, you're super fired up. You want to get in every upgrade. You want to be involved in everything. If there's a war, you want to go fight it. And so there's a lot of uncontained energy that goes with that. And I was upset about this upgrade that I didn't get into, right? And this other fighter pilot did. And I remember my flight commander sitting me down and he goes, Nick, he goes, I'm going to ask you a question that somebody asked me a long time ago. And remember, this guy, I mean, I was a young lieutenant. This guy's a captain, right? So he's not like I'm sitting down with an O6 or a general officer. He looked at me and he goes, Nick, what does the Air Force owe you? He goes, what do we owe you? He goes, I'm going to help you out. He goes, we don't owe you anything. We don't owe you anything and stuff. And that resonated with me at a very, very early age. And what he was getting at is like, dude, have a servant's heart. You know what I mean? It's like, be happy this guy got the upgrade and stay in the fight, work hard every day, and stuff will work out for you. But it was kind of wrapped up in that one sentence of, what does the Air Force owe you? And he was right. He was 100% right. And so that did imprint on me. And when he was doing it, he ultimately had every right to like be upset with me and stuff. And again, I was young and, not being really cool about it. And he was just like totally calm and cool. I didn't feel judged. I didn't feel like chastised. He didn't go overboard with it. There was no like, the stereotypical military poking their finger in your chest and a lot of F bombs and all the other things associated with it. There was none of that. And I walked away from there. I was like, wow, I mean, I just got in trouble, but I actually feel really, really good right now. And it was the way that he approached it. And so a lot of leadership is really emotional intelligence, right? And knowing how to deal with the person that is sitting in front of you and making sure that the, quote, punishment fits the crime, right? That you're not
Mhm.
going overboard because of your authority and not taking advantage of those things. And that was, probably my earliest memory in the military. And, Jill, along the way, I had a lot of not good leaders, you know, I mean, people that, I looked at and we've all been there. If you've worked anywhere, you've likely worked for somebody that you didn't particularly enjoy working with. But, what I learned at an early age is you can learn a lot from those people. And what you learn from them is ways not to do things,
Not to
right?
do it, what not to do. So, and
Yeah.
that kind of leads me into my next question. So we can always remember the first time we were instructed to take the lead on something, and then we can also remember the first time that we failed as a leader. So, can you tell me about both of those instances if you remember them?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's times where, and this is where you have to check yourself as a leader. And I'll tell you what the rule that I've developed and I hold myself accountable to. And then, and it's actually two rules. And then I'll tell you the situations after that. So, rule one, okay, if you are emotional, you're not allowed to make a decision. And I make myself have a 72-hour kind of cooling off period, but it's not really cooling off because I'm not a hot tempered personality. But if you're feeling emotional about something, if you wait 72 hours, I promise you, it's not going to be nearly as bad as you think it is in the moment. Okay. So give yourself that amount of time. Secondly, get the rest of the story. Okay. Because as a leader, people are going to come to you, right? Especially if you're an approachable leader, which you should be, and they're going to tell you things. Okay. And it's very easy to get caught up in the person who is telling the story, to get caught up in their emotion. Okay. And I'm not suggesting that people are always lying to you, but you're probably not getting the entire picture. Okay. So always, always, always get the rest of the story. Leadership failures. Okay. I can remember early on as a young leader, I literally hit every tripwire that you can hit, right? If it was there and it was a stumbling block, I was going right over the top of it. And nothing is more, for me, it was more demoralizing as a leader than somebody you convinced was an awesome person, worthy of promotion and worthy of a leadership position, and not doing due diligence by that person by things like asking around what has their background been, those type of things, and just taking things at face value and then coming to regret it a month later and then having to
Mhm.
do something about it. That is a horrible situation to put yourself in, right? And so I that lesson that I learned, again, I go back to, don't make an emotional decision, whether positive or negative, right? And make sure you get the rest of the story. So make sure that you're making a good decision, for your people, because this is a leader that's going to work for me, that's going to have people working for them. And you owe it to everybody within your chain of command to make sure that you're putting a good, healthy, minded leader in a place that they can care for their folks.
Yeah. So, you took those instances of, growing and learning from our bad decisions and lessons, So, how did you use those when you're a group commander leading 500 airmen? And how did was your style any different leading from when you were just, a small flight crew leader? How did you have to lead different when it was a small group to a large group?
Yeah, so when you have a smaller group, it's a little bit more intimate, right? You can be involved in the daily lives of the people that you're leading. When you have 500, 600 people working for you, although you want to be approachable and your people know you, okay, it is impossible to take on the task of being the person for each one of those 500, 600 airmen, right? So your mindset has to shift in I need to be the person for the leaders who report to me so they can be good leaders for the people that report to them. So I think what changed for me, so one of the unique things that you got to do in the Air Guard was a pilot could also be a commander in maintenance. Okay, that didn't likely did not exist in the active duty Air Force. So it was a huge privilege to be able to go over and do that. So when I took over, especially as a group commander, remember we had an 8 o'clock meeting every morning. And I remember sitting in this meeting for the first time, and it was one of the most hostile, toxic environments I'd ever been in the entirety of my life. And mind you, I had been in the military for quite a while now and been around fighter pilots and everything else. And I sat there in my mind, I'm like going, oh, good Lord, what have I gotten myself into? Because it wasn't 5 minutes into the meeting. There's the finger pointing. There's, obviously you can see where lines have been drawn between people's relationships and all these other things. And I kind of had established a mindset that when you go into a new leadership position, give it 3 months, right? You need to observe, get to know your people, really try to figure out what's going on, where you need to interject yourself, where you don't need to interject yourself, and those type of things. And that 3 months had to turn into 3 days because I couldn't take it anymore. And I remember going home and I'm talking to my wife about this. I'm like, and I tell her, so like, baby, this is unbelievable. I've never seen a group of people that seemingly hate each other as much as these folks do. The leadership below me, the chain is completely broken. I've got, a few chiefs that are completely off the rails on some things. And so I stepped back into that meeting on the third day and I start the meeting, the bickering starts, and I kind of just stand up and I kind of give them a timeout signal. I'm like, okay, everybody sit down, everybody be quiet for a minute. And I go, and I kind of review the Air Force core values with them, integrity first, service before self, excellence in all we do. I said, clearly, these core values do not resonate with any of you in any way. Okay. So I am going to give you a core value that is going to complement those, but we're going to super simplify this and we're going to hold ourselves accountable to it. And that core value is this: work hard and be nice. That's it. And if you're coming into work and you're not feeling particularly energetic that day, I can deal with lazy, okay, but I am not going to deal with not being nice. What is going on in this room is completely opposite of the values that we say that we hold dear. It is actually the opposite of the oath that you took to become a member of the Air Force. And we are going to work towards harmonizing our relationships and we are going to work in concert with one another and make this work. Okay. So I'm not naive. I know it's not going to take one statement out of me and all of a sudden is somebody's going to come in and wave a magic wand, right? And everybody's going to get along and everything's going to be perfect. So it was a long road. It was a year and a half. And you, at the end of the day, if you are true to your core values, if I'm telling people they need to work hard and be nice, what I have to do as a leader is I have to make sure that I'm, promoting and encouraging those who are exhibiting that behavior and removing those who seemingly cannot. And that's exactly what I did. I am proud to say that, when I retired from that position, so I was in that position for a total of, about 5 years. And when I left, the dynamic and the culture was 180 degrees from when I started, right? But it takes a lot of hard work. You have to, leadership for a lot of people, and I'm kind of referencing back towards the leaders that were not so good in our lives. Leadership can be easy for people if you don't care about people, right? If you
Mhm.
actually care about people, leadership is really, really, really hard, okay? Because you become emotionally connected to them no matter what kind of leadership position that you're in, because you do genuinely care about them. Because, and I would remind our chiefs and I would remind our commanders, I go, listen, your people do not operate in a vacuum. They just do not. They are not robots. Okay. They have lives. They have financial issues. They have marital issues. They have a kid who's gone off the rails. They have a lot of stressors in their life. So if something is going on with them, do more than chastise, find out. Okay. Be somebody that they can come to. And because ultimately, the goal here, if we're true to what we're saying with our core values, our goal is to make these airmen better at everything, better at life, better at their marriage, better parents, better human beings. And that caught fire. And so the goal with that ultimately is to create that positive culture, holding to our core values and not just speaking them, but living them. And you create an environment where the toxicity can no longer exist. Toxicity
Mhm.
cannot be comfortable in that environment because it can't be fueled.
Right. So I remember a soldier after my husband retired. He had come back and he had told my husband that he was one of those soldiers that just, wanted to get in trouble and just look for things to do, just to be the outcast. And he had told my husband, I appreciate the hard love that you had given to me. He didn't have the father figure
Yeah.
growing up, so he didn't understand, the discipline and everything that it took. And my husband, he would feel bad of, having to counsel him all the time and be on him, but he came to him and, thanked him for that. And I think sometimes, when you think that you're not doing great as a leader and then somebody comes back to you years later, I really think that, that's a tall testament to how, great leaders can, because it's that caring, it's knowing that they have a sick child at home or, something else that's happening and it's knowing why they're coming to work in a bad mood or upset or something like that. And in the military environments, if they take that to the battlefield, it could not just harm themselves; it can harm everyone. So um, I've always looked to military as great leaders to look up to. So I mean, I didn't serve, but I was around them all the time, and so
Yeah.
when I was able to accept this job with General Franks in his institute and museum, I look to him for, guidance, and his calmness, and his way of thinking is, I use that in my everyday life now. So, and it just makes you a better leader, I think, when you have those type of people to look up to. So,
It does,
um,
and leaders need to understand too. And I think that Nick Saban put it best. All right, because you're not in a popularity contest, okay? Because you're going to lose, okay? I'm going to let young leaders in on a secret. Your people are going to talk about you, okay? So just accept that. And Nick Saban put it this way. He goes, if you want to be popular, sell ice cream. Don't be a leader. Okay. It can be a very lonely place. Okay. Because at the end of the day, you have to make decisions. I mean, you still have a mission to do. Okay. I don't want to lose sight of that. Right. I mean, there it is, especially in the military, it is a mission focused organization. When you're in combat, it is literally a no fail mission at that point, and stuff. But if you take the in garrison peacetime aspect of that and cultivate and build these relationships with your people when the heat of the battle starts, when things get hard, okay, you're not dealing with the personality stuff associated with that. You can focus on the mission because people trust each other.
right, that trust. That's,
Yep.
yeah. So that good leaders, not only trust their team, but the team trusts them. And that's one thing that we teach at Four Star is, you have to get to know your team, and you have to trust in your team, and they have to trust in you. So, hello, this is Dr. Jill Green with the General Tommy Franks Leadership Institute and Museum. I would like to tell you about one of our partner sponsors, Justin Krieger. He has worked as an independent insurance agent at Krieger Insurance Agency in his hometown of Hobart, Oklahoma since 1999. Justin is honored to help with our annual Celebration of Freedom event and has served on the board of directors for the General Tommy Franks Leadership Institute and Museum for many years. He is a fifth generation farmer and rancher in Kiowa County, where cattle, crops, and even insurance is sold with a handshake. Give him a call at 580-726-3076 or stop by the office and speak with Justin, Denise Reeves, or Wendy Block about your insurance needs. Krieger Insurance is thankful for their loyal customers and friends who have supported them through the years and look forward to earning your business as well. Justin feels honored to live in such a great country, and he is proud to be a sponsor of the Core Principles of Leadership podcast. Please enjoy the rest of this podcast experience brought to you by your friends at Krieger Insurance Agency. So after your 30-year, military service, you retire, and then almost immediately you start with Folds of Honor. I'm sure you had several different options. As a pilot, there's lots of other things that you can go out and why Folds of Honor?
Great question. So the CEO and I are very good friends, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Rooney. So he and I flew F-16s together. So I've been aware of Folds of Honor for several years. We connected, probably 3 or 4 years before I retired, right? And he goes, "Hey, when you're looking at retirement, keep me in mind." Okay. And I kind of put that in the back of my mind. And as I'm, a couple of years out from retirement, my wife and I are going over our options. And, we still had, at the time, a couple of kiddos in college and didn't want to go be an airline pilot. God bless the guys who go do that. We need great people flying us around, but it just wasn't for me. I looked at, a lot of the typical jobs that retired 06s go to, contracting and that type of stuff wasn't, didn't feel good. And the folds felt good. And for me, I mentioned my personal story, losing my dad when I was 15. So I lived, having to work 40 hours a week through college, doing that type of stuff. And, was able to make it out the other side. And I really just wanted to make sure that no other kid had to do that, right? It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
And especially for those who lost a parent, trying to be successful in life, worrying about money and doing that type of stuff. And so it just was for lack of a better word, it was, really a God thing. It just felt right. and a good place for me to land, a place for me to continue to serve. Because, after 30 years, when you wake up the next day after wearing that uniform really for the last time, it's hard. I mean, it
Yeah.
is like that wasn't just what you did, it's who you were. And
Hmm.
now you kind of got to redefine yourself in a way. And so Folds made sense. It's a righteous mission. It's a unifying mission for this country, and I wanted to be a part of it.
So, with that, can you tell our listeners a little bit about Folds of Honor and how it started and how it contributes so much to our nation?
Yeah. So again, started by Lieutenant Colonel Dan Rooney, our CEO and founder. He happened to find himself after his second combat tour in Iraq on a civilian flight where there was a dignified transfer that was occurring. Okay. So he witnessed the flag draped coffin coming down the cargo hold. He saw, the mother, the father, the wife, and the 4-year-old son. The 4-year-old son is what hit his heart. So Dan's got 5 daughters. And, so the thought goes through his mind, what's going to happen to this little boy? Because his dad's not going to be around to play ball, tuck him in, be there when he has his first broken heart, those type of things. So, what is a gift? Not a gift, that's the wrong word. What is something that we could do for their kids to help them understand that not only is their father hero remembered and not forgotten, but that kiddo is not forgotten either? And you know what? Gift of education just made sense. And so that is kind of ground zero, for Folds, and it grew from there. For the listeners out there who don't know what we do, we provide educational scholarships to the spouses and kids of military members and now first responders who have either been killed or disabled. So since inception, you go from year one of raising about $1 million and sending a few hundred scholarships out to now, 16 years later, we have put 50,000 scholarships out the door to the tune of about $230 million, which is just absolutely amazing. We got kids in all 50 states, okay, at a cross section of schools. And it's not just college, it's technical schools. You want to go be a plumber, an electrician, follow some sort of trade. We can support that for our really tough cases, like especially for our Gold Star spouses. We have a children's program. Okay. So we can help with tutoring, maybe get a kiddo in a private school context and that type of stuff to give them, a fighting chance at healing and, and survive in the aftermath of losing their loved one. And it really is, and I mentioned this before, a unifying message, right? I think some of the best things that the military and first responder community can provide to this nation is a message of unity and hope, right?
Mhm.
Because you'd have to be living under a rock right now to not understand that the country is wildly divided. Okay, pick a subject, likely we're split down the middle on that. But the one thing that we're not split down the middle on is those who protect our freedom, okay, and protect our safeties, okay. 911 is dialed 240 million times a year, okay. So we kind of take for granted we hit 911.
Mhm.
An average of 4 first responders are going to come to your worst moment, okay, and risk their lives to save yours. If you can't get behind taking care of the families who provide that for us, then we've really, really lost our way as a country, right? And that has been a resonating, unifying message. What we tell people, the Folds of Honor, we're not red, we're not blue, we're red, white, and
Mhm.
blue. We're red, white, and blue, and we will, with our last breath, defend these families and make sure that none of them are lost, at all.
Right. Yeah. So, and that's kind of what I mean, General Franks and we teach. We don't, when we bring our leaders in, we don't try to, you know, make them be conservative or liberal or this or that. We teach them to stand by their values and be good leaders by how their culture raised them and taught them. And yeah, I really that is what is missing is everything is just so polarizing. So So when I started at General Franks, it had already been established. And, much like Folds was when you came on board, it's one of the top charities in our country. So how do you come in to lead a successful organization like Folds, but in your own style? Were there any individuals that, you really had to, persuade to, come on board with you and follow your direction? Or, was it just the same old?
So I think, yeah, I mean, the Folds has experienced exponential growth, especially in the last 5 years. When you look at 5 years ago, we raised, roughly, 22 million dollars, and we'll probably raise somewhere near $80 million this year. So that is, and you're talking 400% growth in 5 years. That is massive change, okay, in any organization. So growth is both a blessing and a curse, okay.
Mhm.
So I was catching this like at the point of like exponential growth, right? So there was a lot of stuff just in terms of our, how we organized our organizational chart and reporting dynamics and doing those type of things, stuff that I was well equipped with. But I felt very welcomed and supported coming into the position because I had spent 4 years, not in the position, right? I wasn't in charge. And so that gives me a certain amount of, or gave me a lot of credibility with the team. And because I'd been there, done that with them. Okay. It
Mhm.
wasn't like somebody coming from the outside knew that nobody knew, that was an unknown person coming in and trying to make changes and that type of stuff. And the changes that I made, nothing was like, hey, we're like, swinging an axe and cutting things off. I go, let's massage things to make sure that they're working best. And that was one of the things that, I was able to cultivate in the military, was being able to look at an organization from a 30,000-foot view and know how to move the pieces on the board to make sense. And that's what we've done. You'll never get to perfection with that stuff. Perfection can never be our goal. It's just being humble enough to constantly improve. And the team has embraced that. And
Mhm.
that's what we've been doing moving forward.
So, I mean, you and I know that there's always going to be a need to, care for our veterans and their families. But um, many times when we're not kind of in an active, combat or war environment, there's, others that don't have affiliations to the military that, they're kind of not in the forefront. So, how do you, during a time like this, how do you perceive keeping folds relevant?
Yeah, great question. Constantly on our mind, what we want to remind people of, the global war on terrorism was over 2 decades. Okay.
Mhm.
There's millions of lives that have been impacted by this. Okay. And we are just now scratching the surface of it. Okay. So, I mean, we obviously have a responsibility, even though we aren't, quote, in an active um, combat situation, or at least anything that is constantly on the news and stuff where
Mhm.
people get most of their information. There is still a responsibility to, make sure that we're caring for those who suffered from the global war on terrorism. And, first responders are always going to be relevant, right? You may not have military in your community, but likely you have somebody, you have a local sheriff's department, you have somebody that is always there. There is a presence, and so the relevance is going to be there. And let's not be naive as a country either, right? As long as we are going to serve the cause of freedom, okay, and as long as we as a country are willing to protect those freedoms, there's going to be somebody out there who wants to take it away from us, right?
Mhm.
And if we're going to defend it, there's always going to be a need for organizations like Folds of Honor, right? Or the people of America to unify behind a common message to go, you know what? We appreciate the less than half of 1% that wakes up every day, puts on our nation's uniform, and protects those freedoms. And so we're going to commit together that we're going to protect those families. So in that sense, I think it stays super relevant and should stay relevant for the country. But you got to keep talking about it.
Yeah. So we tell our leaders that they have to have passion, whatever they're wanting to be involved in, however, but they have to get that passion in working for a nonprofit sector. sometimes it can be grueling. There's passion when you start the day. When you walk in at 8 o'clock, there's, you're just oozing passion and ready to get the day going. And by 5 o'clock, it can be depleted. So, as a leader and in your organization, how do you keep the passion in yourself and those that are working with you?
Great question. So the what I talk to my folks about, and you're 100% right. I mean, let's not be naive here. Like when you work for a nonprofit, much of it still is a job, right? I mean, you still have the
Mhm.
same life still happens for you, right? It's not like just like I used the analogy earlier. My airmen I know didn't operate in a vacuum, and neither do the folks here at Folds. They still have lives and things going on and stuff. And so on the occasion that maybe, I can feel sorry for myself or it's been a hard week or I'm on the road a bunch and stuff like that, I remind myself of these recipient families that I've met. Okay. And recently I was with a young lady, her name is Alex. And I say young, she's an adult. Okay. And her husband, who was a police officer, and she was sharing her story, he was killed in the line of duty serving a $15 or a bench warrant on a $15 parking ticket, was met at the door with an AK-47 and shot in the face and died. Okay. A year later, so at the time, she's in her early 20s. Okay. She has a young child who has special needs, and she delivers her second child 2 days after her husband is killed. Okay.
Oh,
You fast forward a couple of years after that, her special needs child dies of medical complications and stuff. And when I'm talking to her, I'm sitting there just, in my mind, just going, "Oh my God, how did you make it the other side of this thing?" And just the faith and the positivity oozing from her and everything that she was talking about. And I sat there and I thought about it. And I do this in my quiet times in the morning a lot, and I'm like, I'm not having a bad day. I'm like, when I think of people like her, I go, what reignites the passion inside of me? I'm like, if I am not being my best and I'm not fighting for the Alexes of the world, then who is? If not me, then who? Right.
hmm
And if that can't drive the passion in you to, kind of set aside petty differences and, the mundane annoyances of, a day-to-day work life, then you cannot be here at the Folds of Honor. It's really that simple. I mean, that is our driving passion. That is our why. Ultimately, at the end of the day, every decision I make, I pretend that I have to sit across from the Alexes of the world and defend it, right? And
hmm
explain it to her and go, this is in your best interest. And that really keeps me laser focused. It keeps my passion on fire. And that's what I preach to the team.
So that's what General Franks, anytime we take something to him or Colonel Hayes, who was his chief of staff for, you know, 30 years ago, is still with him to this day. Um, you take something to them and they will always sit and just ask, how will that help our students?
Yep.
That's just, that's how they think of this, is what benefit is that going to provide for our students? And um, I think that's really how you have to, in the nonprofit world, or servant leaders, even, it's how you have to you know think of it. So, and I'm sure that that's how you approach donors too, when you're out and you're trying to cultivate, new relationship with these donors to get to that $80 million. Um, how do you reflect to them? And, I'm sure there are times that people tell you no. And how do you handle that as a leader?
Well, I mean, with every question, there's two answers, right? It's either yes or it's no. If I'm doing my job and I'm doing things the right way, if you ask me what does Folds of Honor do, okay, in terms of that, we're in the storytelling business, right? I mean, my job is to, in an appropriate way, to emotionally connect them to these families that we serve. Okay. And you do that by telling stories like I just did with Alex, right? And it's like, these are the families that we're trying to help. Here's our need. And of course, we talk about our efficiencies, that we operate at 91 cents on the dollar, that, every dollar that you send us is 100% accounted for, and we make sure it goes to the right our educational programs and that type of stuff. And really, but just instill in them that hey, there is a huge need here, and where there is and find that passion inside of them that relates to the mission, whether it's corporate America, an individual donor, whoever it might be. And because at the Folds, we don't, I never approach anybody in terms of fundraising like with hat in hand and go, wow, it'd be really nice if you wrote us $1 million check right now. Although, we wouldn't turn that down. But at the same time, I want them to connect with us in a very real way because we want them to become a part of the mission. We want you to connect with these families. We're bringing you into the Folds family. And for a lot of folks, it is getting them from understanding the difference between success and significance, right? Yeah, a lot of the people we talk to are successful, but are you doing anything that's significant? And a Folds is a great way for them to anchor themselves and be significant for an underrepresented community.
Mhm. So, we're a nonprofit, and it can be a tough world out there, but it's just about the stories of the people that you're helping and just showing and what kind of great success you're creating when you're doing that. So, and that's what we tell our young leaders. We don't care what direction you go. We're not trying to force you or put you into the direction of the military. And we just want you to go out and be great servant leaders. And that's what some of our students, they've already started nonprofits, and they're some of the greatest young leaders that our world can have. And General Franks will always say, it's my generation and your parents' generation that screwed this world up, and it's going to be your generation that comes out and has to fix it. So
Yep.
that's why he does what he does. And um, kids, and luckily my husband is still here. We thank God every day for that. But it's kids like my son and my daughter that have been helped by Folds, and have a story to tell, just like all of Folds of Honor's recipients do. And if it wasn't for that vision that Colonel Rooney had that day when he was on that airplane, and his vision and his great servant leadership, it wouldn't, Folds wouldn't exist. And the help that they've given to so many people out there. And so I know there's so many that are grateful for it. So we always like to ask our podcast guest, if you could give yourself, your 17 or 18-year-old self, some advice as they're heading out into the world, what would that be?
And again, you asked that really good questions. I would say the best advice that I could give somebody is don't be a prisoner of common assumption. Okay. Because, dream big, right? And don't let anybody talk you out of it. Okay. If like that fire that burns inside of you, you want to go change the world, you want to, whatever it is that you want to go do, drown out the background noise. Okay. And just believe and go. And, because I can remember even when you tell people at a young age you're going to go be a fighter pilot and that type of stuff, immediately in their mind, they go, well, that is a very hard, maybe unattainable goal, right? Very small percentage, get to do that. And I can remember even in college in this horrible job I was working, loading semi trucks, my boss literally laughing at me and making fun of me. Okay. And stuff like that. I still wish I could run across this guy today, right? And stuff. But it is, you're always going to find somebody out there. And when I said, don't be a prisoner of common assumption, you're always going to find somebody out there who's smarter than you, okay, who's stronger than you, all of these other things, right? All these natural talents that you think these people have, they give them a leg up. But I'm going to promise you one thing. If you won't be a prisoner of common assumption, don't allow people to do that and outwork everybody else. Okay. And that was my thing. I cultivated a discipline that I still hold to this day that I started when I was in college. Okay. the one thing that I can control is my morning. Okay. I can get up before everybody else gets up. I can get my mind, body, and soul in the right place. Okay. And I can choose to drown out the negativity. And this sounds cliche, but I can believe in myself, right? I'm going to take that fire, that passion that's inside of me, assume that it came from somewhere other than me, and I'm being directed in a way that I know that is right. Okay. And in a good way and in a right way, I'm not going to let anything get in the way of that.
Right. And that's great advice, because if you don't believe in yourself, nobody else is going to believe in you either. So that is great advice to leave us with. And Colonel Nichols, I appreciate your time today. It's been a real pleasure and honor to speak with you. And thank you for what you do. And thank you for your service. And we'll just wrap it up from there.
Okay. Awesome, Jill. Thank you. You have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Thank you again to REI Oklahoma for making this podcast possible. For nearly 40 years, the board, staff, patrons, and supporters of the nonprofit economic development REI Oklahoma have been committed to expanding Oklahoma's economic prosperity, earning the reputation of being one of the most comprehensive economic development organizations in the country. Business lines, training workshops, business consulting, and networking opportunities, as well as technical assistance and even commercial business space, are made available to Oklahoma entrepreneurs and small businesses. For low and moderate income individuals and families, down payment and or closing cost assistance is offered. Learn more at reiok.org. On behalf of the 4-Star Leadership with General Tommy Franks team, I'm your host, Dr. Jill Green, and this has been the Core Principles of Leadership with General Tommy Franks podcast. Now it's your turn, podcast listeners. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and let us know what you think of this episode and all our other episodes. Share this podcast with all the leaders and up-and-coming leaders in your circles. Be sure to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast listening platform, and don't forget to mark your calendars the last Friday of each month for another inspiring episode. So for now, as General Franks always says, go be feisty.